2019, a team of neurologists at Stanford University placed a patient inside an fMRI scanner and asked him one simple question: "Why didn't you speak up?" The man had watched his business partner embezzle $7 million over 5 years. He knew. He had the emails, the receipts, the timestamps, but he never said a word. When the scan results came back, the doctors saw something terrifying. His amygdala, the brain's fear center, had physically atrophied. Not from disease, from disuse. Silence hadn't kept the peace. Silence had rewired his brain to accept betrayal as normal. If you're listening to this story, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me what state you're listening from. Now, let me tell you what happened next. Evelyn Reyes was 43 years old when she realized her own research was destroying her marriage. She stood in her laboratory at MIT, staring at a petri dish containing neural tissue from a rat that had been conditioned to remain silent in the face of repeated small injustices. The rat had learned, just like the Stanford patient, that vocalizing punishment was worse than enduring the abuse, so it stopped trying. The tissue showed shrunken dendritic spines, weakened synaptic connections, and a dramatic reduction in BDNF, a protein essential for learning and emotional resilience. Evelyn had been studying this phenomenon for 6 years. She had published 17 papers on the neuroscience of conditioned silence, the mechanism by which living beings, humans included, gradually unlearn the instinct to protest. Her work had been funded by the National Institutes of Health. She had presented at conferences in Chicago and San Francisco. Fellow neuroscientists called her findings elegant and disturbing, but none of them knew that every evening Evelyn went home to a husband who hadn't asked her a single genuine question in 843 days. Not a fight, not an argument. Just a slow, creeping silence that had begun with small things: a dinner invitation she forgot to mention, a promotion he failed to celebrate, and had grown into a vast, empty continent between them. She didn't speak up. She told herself she was being mature. She told herself love didn't need constant validation. She told herself exactly what her rats had been conditioned to believe. That protest was more painful than endurance. The tipping point came on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic Tuesday, not one marked by explosions or tears, just a Tuesday like any other. Evelyn was reviewing data from her latest experiment, a longitudinal study measuring the effects of chronic silence on the prefrontal cortex. Her graduate assistant, a sharp-eyed young woman named Priya, placed a folder on her desk. "Dr. Reyes," Priya said, "the results from cohort D came in. The subjects who remained silent for 6 months showed a 31% reduction in gray matter density in the anterior cingulate cortex. That's the region responsible for detecting errors and initiating corrective action." Evelyn nodded. She had expected something like this. The anterior cingulate cortex is the brain's alarm system. When something goes wrong, when a decision leads to a bad outcome, this region fires and creates a feeling of unease, a signal that you need to change course. But if you ignore that signal enough times, the brain stops wasting energy on it. It prunes the connections. It reallocates resources elsewhere. The alarm doesn't ring because the alarm no longer exists. "Remarkable," Evelyn said quietly. "So they literally lost the ability to recognize that something was wrong." Priya hesitated. She looked at Evelyn with an expression that carried more weight than a simple research discussion. "Dr. Reyes," she said, "can I ask you something personal?" Evelyn felt a small, cold ripple move through her chest. She knew what was coming. Everyone in the department knew. Her husband Michael had stopped attending faculty parties 2 years ago. He didn't pick her up from the airport anymore. He had forgotten their anniversary 3 times in a row. And Evelyn, the world's leading expert on the neuroscience of silence, had never once confronted him about any of it. "Sure," Evelyn said, though her voice had grown thin. Priya leaned forward. "You've taught me that the anterior cingulate cortex fires when something is wrong. But you've also taught me that people can ignore that signal for so long that the signal stops coming. So I'm not asking if something is wrong with your marriage. I'm asking if you can still feel that something is wrong." Room went very quiet. Outside, the Boston wind rattled the laboratory windows. The incubators hummed. The refrigerator containing $500,000 worth of antibodies buzzed softly. Evelyn looked down at her hands. They were steady. They had always been steady. She had dissected brains with those hands, performed microsurgeries on living tissue, injected viral vectors into precise neural circuits. But she had never once used them to reach across the dinner table and say, "Michael, where did you go?" "No," Evelyn said finally. The word came out flat, clinical, like a diagnosis. "No, I don't think I can feel it anymore." That evening, Evelyn drove home through the Somerville streets she had known for 15 years. The houses were the same. The coffee shop on the corner was the same. But everything looked slightly out of focus, as if her brain had stopped investing in rendering details it no longer considered important. She parked the car, a sensible Honda Civic, 5 years old, and walked up the steps to the front door. Inside, Michael was sitting on the couch watching a baseball game. The Red Sox were playing the Yankees. The volume was low. He didn't look up when she entered. He didn't look up when she set her bag down. He didn't look up when she stood in the doorway for 30 seconds waiting for something, anything that resembled recognition. "Hey," Evelyn said. "Hey," Michael replied. His eyes remained on the screen. Evelyn walked into the kitchen. She opened the refrigerator. Inside was a carton of eggs, half a loaf of bread, and a plastic container of leftover pasta from 3 nights ago. No note, no surprise, no evidence that another human being had considered her existence at any point during the day. She closed the refrigerator door and stood there, her hand still on the handle. She thought about the Anterior Cingulate cortex. She thought about the rats that had stopped trying to escape the mild foot shocks because they had learned that struggling made no difference. She thought about the Stanford patient who had watched $7 million disappear and said nothing because his brain had pruned the very circuits that would have made him feel alarmed. And then she thought about her mother. Her mother, Evelyn Reyes, had been a seamstress in El Paso. She had worked 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, sewing clothes for a company that paid her less than minimum wage because she was undocumented. For 20 years, Isabel had said nothing. She had never complained to the labor board. She had never joined a union. She had never even told her children how much her hands hurt at night because she didn't want to worry them. She had endured, and when she died of a heart attack at 59, the doctor said the cause was chronic stress. The coroner's report didn't use the word silence, but Evelyn, even as a 22-year-old graduate student, had known that was the real cause. Evelyn walked back into the living room. She stood in front of the television. Michael's eyes flickered not to her face but to the space where the screen used to be before she blocked it. "You move," he said. Not angry, just flat, just empty. "No," Evelyn said. Michael finally looked at her. His expression was not surprised or annoyed or concerned. It was the expression of a man who had forgotten years ago that his wife was someone he needed to see. "What's wrong?" he asked. But the question was mechanical, a reflex as automatic as a knee jerk. Evelyn opened her mouth. And for the first time in 843 days, she did not swallow the words. "I don't know if there's anything wrong anymore," she said. "That's what's wrong." Michael blinked. He set down the remote control. He looked at her the way he might look at a strange sound in the engine of a car he had driven for years. A sound that might be nothing or might be everything, but that he didn't really want to investigate because investigating meant stopping. "Evelyn," he said, "we've been married for 19 years. Every marriage has ups and downs." "That's not an answer," she said. "That's a script. You've been using that script for years, and I've been accepting it because my brain has literally stopped telling me that scripts are a problem." Michael stood up. He was 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, a man who had once been an architect and now worked as a project manager for a commercial real estate firm. He had designed their house. He had built the bookshelves in the study. He had been once the kind of husband who left notes on the bathroom mirror. Evelyn couldn't remember the last time she had seen his handwriting. "What are you talking about?" he asked. Evelyn laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who has spent years translating complex neuroscience into plain English for grant committees and suddenly cannot find the words to translate her own life. "I'm talking about the fact that my research shows silence destroys the brain's ability to detect harm," she said. "And I'm the living proof." Room was silent. The baseball game played on the television, soundless now, the Yankees scoring a run that no one celebrated. Michael stood there, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. And Evelyn realized with a clarity that felt almost surgical that she had been waiting for him to rescue her from this moment. She had been waiting for him to say something, do something, feel something that would prove her research wrong. But he didn't. He couldn't, because he had been silent too long as well. "I'm going to stay at the lab tonight," Evelyn said. "I need to think." She didn't wait for a response. She picked up her bag, walked out the front door, and drove back to MIT. The streets were dark now. The streetlights cast orange pools on the asphalt. She parked in her reserved spot and walked through the empty hallways to her laboratory. The building was quiet except for the hum of machines and the distant sound of a janitor's cart. She sat down at her desk. The folder from Priya was still there. She opened it and read the results again. Cohort D, 31% reduction in gray matter density. The anterior cingulate cortex, the brain's alarm system. She pulled out her phone. Her contact list was short, mostly colleagues, a few former mentors, her sister who lived in Albuquerque. She scrolled past Michael's name. She stopped at a name she hadn't called in 2 years, Dr. Samuel Okonkwo, a neurologist at Johns Hopkins who specialized in fear extinction and learned helplessness. He had been her postdoctoral advisor. He had warned her years ago that studying silence might change her. She dialed. The phone rang 4 times, then a familiar voice, deep and calm, answered. "Evelyn, it's midnight." "I know," she said. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer as a doctor, not as a friend." There was a pause. She could hear him shifting in bed, sitting up, turning on a light. "Go ahead." "The anterior cingulate cortex recover?" she asked. "After years of conditioned silence, can the alarm system be rebuilt?" Another pause, longer this time. When Samuel spoke again, his voice was softer. "You're not asking about a rat, are you?" "No," Evelyn said. "I'm not." Samuel exhaled slowly. "The literature says yes, with intensive intervention. But the intervention has to be behavioral, not chemical. You have to deliberately engage in behaviors that trigger the alarm. You have to put yourself in situations where something is wrong and you refuse to remain silent. Over time, the brain will start to reinvest in those circuits." "But Evelyn, but what?" "But it's like learning to feel pain again after being numbed. It's going to hurt. That's the point. The alarm is supposed to hurt. That's how you know something needs to change." Evelyn closed her eyes. She thought about the wooden house model in the original story, the gift made with trembling hands, dismissed with a laugh. She thought about the mother in the wheelchair, the son who wouldn't meet her eyes, the father who had been silent for too long. She understood finally that her research and that story were the same thing. Silence was not peace. Silence was a slow, quiet brain injury. Samuel, she said, I think I need to start feeling pain again. Then you know what you have to do, he replied. Evelyn hung up. She sat in the dark laboratory for a long time, the fMRI images of atrophied brains glowing on her computer screen. And she began, for the first time in years, to plan not an experiment but an exit. She did not sleep that night. She sat at her desk, the blue light of her monitor painting her face in cold tones, and she wrote, not a letter to Michael, not a research paper. She wrote a timeline, a cold, clinical, brutally honest reconstruction of the past 843 days, the last time she could remember Michael touching her with intention, the last time he had asked about her work, the last time they had laughed together. She wrote down every forgotten anniversary, every dinner eaten in silence, every night she had gone to bed while he stayed on the couch watching sports highlights. The list was 27 items long. When she finished, she read it 3 times, and for the first time in years she felt something in her chest. Not anger, not sadness, something smaller, sharper, more precise, the faintest flicker of an alarm. Her anterior cingulate cortex was trying to wake up. By 6:00 a.m. she had made a decision. She called Priya. I need you to take over the lab for the next week, Evelyn said. Full authority, the NIH grant is secure, the protocols are on the shared drive, you're ready. Priya was silent for a moment. Then, is everything okay, Dr. Reyes? No, Evelyn said, but it will be. I'm going to run a personal experiment, single subject, N of 1. What's the hypothesis? Evelyn smiled. It was a grim smile, the smile of someone who has spent her entire professional life studying a phenomenon and has just realized she is the most important data point. That a silenced brain can be reactivated, that the alarm can be rebuilt, and that the cost of rebuilding is exactly as high as the cost of staying silent. She hung up. She drove home. The sun was rising over Somerville, painting the triple-decker houses in shades of gold and pink. It was beautiful in a way that felt almost cruel, the world continuing to turn, the light continuing to fall, while her marriage lay in pieces she had not yet gathered. When she walked through the front door, Michael was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee. He looked up. He did not smile, but he also did not look away. You came back, he said. It was not accusatory, it was not hopeful, it was just an observation, like nodding that it was Tuesday. I came back to tell you something, Evelyn said. She sat down across from him. She placed her hands flat on the table. She remembered what Samuel had said, you have to deliberately engage in behaviors that trigger the alarm. I have not been happy in this marriage for at least 2 years, and I have not said anything because I taught myself and my rats that silence is safer, but I'm done with safety. Michael set down his coffee mug. His hand trembled slightly. It was the first sign of genuine emotion Evelyn had seen from him in months. You're leaving, he said. I don't know yet, Evelyn said. That depends on you, but I need you to understand something. My research shows that when one person in a relationship remains silent, the other person's brain also changes. You have learned to ignore my absence because I have trained you that my absence doesn't matter. We have both been silent, and we have both been damaged by that silence. Michael stared at her. His face was pale. He looked for the first time in years like a man who was seeing something he had been avoiding. What do you want me to do? He asked. Evelyn had prepared for this question. She had spent the sleepless hours at her desk reading the literature on dyadic interventions for learned helplessness. There was a protocol developed by researchers at UCLA for couples who had fallen into patterns of mutual silence. It was brutal. It required daily confrontation logs, structured communication exercises, and a commitment to triggering the alarm deliberately, to saying the thing that felt dangerous, even when every instinct screamed for quiet. I want you to write down every time in the past 2 years that you knew something was wrong and you didn't say anything, Evelyn said. And I will do the same, and then we will read each other's lists out loud. And we will not defend, we will not explain, we will just listen. Michael looked at her for a long moment, then he stood up, walked to the study, and returned with a legal pad and a pen. He sat down across from her. They wrote in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, not the silence of avoidance but the silence of preparation. It took Evelyn 45 minutes to write her list. 27 items, 27 moments when she had felt the faint brush of the alarm and had chosen to ignore it. The time Michael forgot to pick her up from the airport and she took an Uber without saying a word. The time he scheduled a golf trip on their anniversary and she said that's fine while feeling something small die inside her. The time she got a grant for $700,000 and he said that's nice and turned back to the television. Michael's list was longer, 34 items. She watched him write, his brow furrowed, his jaw tight. He wrote slowly as if each word cost him something. When he finished, he set down the pen and pushed the pad toward her. "Read mine first," he said. His voice was rough. Evelyn picked up his list. The handwriting was shaky. She began to read aloud. Item 1, I knew you were upset when I missed your mother's birthday dinner. I saw your face. I said nothing because I didn't want to admit I had forgotten. Item 2, I knew you were exhausted last March when you were writing your NIH grant. I watched you fall asleep at the kitchen table. I didn't make you coffee or rub your shoulders. I walked past because I was afraid you would ask me for help and I didn't know how to help. Item 3, I knew I had stopped looking at you. I noticed it one morning in the bathroom mirror. I saw you standing behind me and I looked away. I told myself it was because I was tired, but I was not tired, I was afraid. Evelyn kept reading. The list went on. Small betrayals, each one a pebble, each one adding to a wall that had grown so high they could no longer see over it. By the time she reached item 29, her hands were shaking, not from anger, from recognition. She had done the same things they both had. When she finished, she looked up. Michael's eyes were red. He was not crying, but he was close. Your turn, he said. Evelyn handed him her list. He read it aloud. His voice cracked at item 14, the time she had lied to her sister about how he was doing, saying we're fine when they were anything but. He stopped at item 22, the time she had gone to a movie alone on a Saturday night because she preferred sitting in a dark room full of strangers to sitting across from him. When he finished, the kitchen was silent. The sun had risen fully now, flooding the room with light. The coffee had gone cold. Neither of them had moved. Now what? Michael asked. Evelyn thought about the original story, the father who had remained silent for years, who had watched his wife's gift dismissed, who had finally drawn a line not with anger but with clarity. She understood now that the line had not been drawn in the wedding hall. It had been drawn years earlier in 1,000 small moments of choice. The wedding was just where the consequences arrived. Now we decide if we want to rebuild, Evelyn said. And rebuilding is not romantic. It is not easy. It is daily, intentional, exhausting work. It is saying the thing that scares you. It is asking the question you have been avoiding. It is feeling the alarm and choosing to act on it instead of numbing it. Michael picked up his coffee mug. He stared into it as if looking for an answer in the dregs. How do you know this works? He asked. You're a scientist, you deal in evidence. What's the evidence that a marriage can recover from this? Evelyn had the answer ready. She had printed it out that morning, a study from the Journal of Marriage and Family Therapy that had followed 42 couples through a 6-month intervention for emotional disengagement. The success rate was modest, 57%, but the predictor of success was not love or compatibility or shared history. It was willingness to tolerate discomfort. The couples who succeeded were the ones who kept showing up to the exercises even when the exercises made them feel sick. The evidence says it's possible but not guaranteed, Evelyn said. The evidence says the brain can recover if the behavior changes. But the evidence also says most people quit before the recovery happens, because the alarm, once reactivated, feels terrible. It feels like failure. It feels like regret. It feels like all the pain you were trying to avoid arriving at once. Michael set down the mug. He reached across the table and took Evelyn's hand. It was the first time he had touched her voluntarily in months. His palm was warm, slightly damp. I don't want to quit, he said, but I'm scared. I'm scared that I've been silent so long that I don't know how to speak anymore. Evelyn squeezed his hand. She thought about her mother who had never learned to speak up, who had died with her hands full of thread and her heart full of unspoken words. She thought about the father in the story, pushing the wheelchair through the castle doors, closing the door behind him not out of spite but out of a final, desperate clarity. She thought about the anterior cingulate cortex, that small bundle of neurons that was the difference between enduring and acting. We learn by doing, Evelyn said. The brain is plastic. It can change, but only if we give it a reason to change. Are you willing to give it a reason? Michael did not answer with words. He stood up, walked around the table, and knelt beside her chair. He put his head in her lap. He did not speak, but he did not need to. The gesture itself, vulnerable, awkward, entirely unlike the man he had become, was the first word of a new language. Evelyn placed her hand on the back of his head. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in years, she let herself feel the full weight of the alarm, the pain of everything that had been lost, the fear of everything that might still be lost, the desperate, terrifying hope that something could be rebuilt. It hurt exactly as much as Samuel had warned, but she did not turn away from it. That was the experiment, that was everything. The week of what Evelyn privately called the reactivation protocol was the worst. Not because of arguments, there were no arguments, not yet. The worst part was how much they had forgotten. Michael had forgotten how to ask open-ended questions. Evelyn had forgotten how to answer without preparing a script. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table every evening, a timer set for 20 minutes, and they attempted to have a conversation that was not about logistics, not about bills, not about schedules, not about whose turn it was to buy groceries. The first night they sat in silence for 5 full minutes before Michael said, "I don't know what to say." Evelyn nodded. "That's okay, say that, say I don't know what to say. That's a real thing, that's not silence." Michael looked at her. "I don't know what to say," he repeated, his voice was strained. "Tell me about your day," Evelyn said, "not the facts, the feelings. What did you feel today?" Michael leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling. He was not used to being asked this question. No one had asked him what he felt in years, not Evelyn, not his colleagues, not his friends. He had become a man who moved through the world reporting facts and accomplishing tasks, his inner life as hidden as a basement no one bothered to enter. "I felt tired," he said finally, "but that's not a feeling, that's a physical state." "Tired can be a feeling," Evelyn said. "What kind of tired?" Michael closed his eyes, the kind where you can't tell if you're exhausted or empty, the kind where you look at your to-do list and you don't care if any of it gets done, that kind. Evelyn felt the alarm flicker again, not the sharp pang of betrayal but something softer, sadder. She had felt that kind of tired too, she had felt it for years. And she had never said a word about it because she had been trained by her mother, by her profession, by her own damn research, that feelings were data to be managed, not signals to be honored. "Thank you for telling me," she said, and she meant it. The second week they began the confrontation logs. This was the part Evelyn had dreaded most. The protocol required them to write down every day one moment when they felt the alarm, when something the other person did or said or failed to do or say triggered that faint, unpleasant sensation of wrongness. And then they had to share it. No editing, no softening. On day 8, Michael wrote, "This morning you made coffee for yourself and not for me. You used to make coffee for both of us. I felt the alarm. I thought she is pulling away. But I did not say anything because I was afraid you would confirm it." Evelyn read the entry out loud. Her voice did not waver. When she finished, she looked at Michael. "I didn't make you coffee because I was afraid you would reject it," she said. "I have been afraid for so long that every gesture I make will be ignored, so I stopped making gestures. That's not pulling away, that's protecting myself, but I see now that the protection has become the problem." Michael nodded slowly. "So what do we do?" "We make a new rule," Evelyn said. "I will make you coffee every morning, and you will drink it, not because you want coffee, because the gesture matters, and if one of us fails, if I forget or you refuse, we write it down and we talk about it, no silence." Michael reached across the table, he touched her hand. It was a small gesture, almost nothing, but it was deliberate, it was chosen, and Evelyn felt something she had not felt in years, the quiet satisfaction of a problem being addressed, not avoided. By the third week, the alarms were coming faster. This was expected. The protocol warned that the reactivation phase would feel like a regression, like everything was falling apart, because the brain was suddenly noticing problems it had learned to ignore. Evelyn's anterior cingulate cortex was firing multiple times a day now, each signal a small electric shock of discomfort. She documented every one. "Michael interrupted me when I was talking to Priya on the phone. I felt dismissed. Michael left his shoes in the middle of the hallway. I tripped. He did not apologize. I felt invisible. Michael watched a movie without me. He did not ask if I wanted to join. I felt excluded." The list grew. It was ugly. It was humiliating. It was also, Evelyn realized, a map of everything that had gone wrong. The interruptions, the carelessness, the silent withdrawals, none of them were catastrophes on their own, but accumulated over years they had become a mountain of small deaths, and the only way to move the mountain was to name every stone. Michael's list was equally brutal. Evelyn sighed when I asked what she wanted for dinner. The sigh meant she was tired of deciding, but she didn't say that, she just sighed. I felt like a burden. Evelyn spent 3 hours in the lab on a Saturday. She didn't text. I sat on the couch waiting. I felt like I didn't matter. Evelyn corrected me in front of her graduate student. The correction was accurate, but the way she said it made me feel small. I said nothing. They read the lists to each other every evening. It took an hour, sometimes longer. There were tears, not dramatic tears, just the slow leak of pressure that had been building for years. There were silences, but not the old silences. These silences were filled with a weight of things finally being said. On the 25th day, Michael did something unexpected. He came home from work with a small wooden box. It was handmade, the joints imperfect, the wood unpolished. He set it on the kitchen table in front of Evelyn. "What's this?" she asked. "I made it," Michael said. His voice was thick. I don't know how to make things. I'm an architect. I design things. I don't build them, but I wanted to build something for you. So I went to a woodworking shop in Cambridge and a guy named Frank showed me how to cut dovetail joints. It took me 4 tries to get one that didn't fall apart. The box is crooked. The lid doesn't close all the way, but I made it for you. Evelyn opened the box. Inside was a piece of paper. On the paper, in Michael's shaky handwriting, I see you. I'm sorry I stopped looking. I will spend the rest of my life learning to see you again. Evelyn did not cry. She had spent too many years suppressing tears to cry easily now. But she felt something shift in her chest, a loosening, a release, the quiet sound of a door opening that had been nailed shut. Michael, she said, this is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me. Michael shook his head. It's ugly, the joints are uneven, the wood is cheap. It's not the box, Evelyn said. It's the attempt. It's the fact that you tried. That's the part that matters. That's the part I almost forgot. She thought about the original story again, the wooden house model dismissed as too cheap, too small. Too unworthy of $1 million wedding. She understood now that the mother in the wheelchair had not been trying to impress anyone. She had been trying to say, I made this for you, my hands hurt, I kept going, please see me. And the daughter-in-law had not seen, the son had not defended, and the father, silent for too long, had finally spoken, not with rage but with a clarity that cut through decades of avoidance. Evelyn looked at the crooked box, she looked at Michael who was waiting, terrified, for her verdict, and she made a choice. I'm not leaving, she said. I was going to. That first night when I called Samuel, I was planning my exit, but I don't want to exit. I want to stay, but I cannot stay in the silence. I cannot stay in the place where nothing is said and nothing is felt. So here's my condition. We keep doing this every day. We keep the logs. We keep the conversations. We keep making ugly boxes and reading terrible lists and feeling the alarm and not turning away. That is the only marriage I want. A loud one, a hard one, a real one. Michael reached across the table. He took both of her hands in his. His palms were rough now. The woodworking had left small blisters and calluses. He looked at her with eyes that were no longer empty. They were tired, yes. They were scared, but they were present. Deal, he said. Epilogue 1 year later. Evelyn stood at the front of a conference room in San Diego. The room was filled with 300 neuroscientists, all of them waiting for her to present the results of her latest study. But she was not going to present the study she had planned. She was going to present something different. She adjusted the microphone, her hands were steady, but her heart was not. That was good, the alarm was supposed to fire. Good morning, she said. My name is Dr. Evelyn Reyes. I am a professor of neuroscience at MIT, and I am here to tell you that I have spent the past 14 months running the most important experiment of my career. The subject was me. The intervention was the deliberate reactivation of my anterior cingulate cortex after years of conditioned silence. The results are preliminary but promising. She clicked to the first slide. It showed an fMRI image of her brain from 18 months ago, the atrophied alarm circuits, the weakened connections, the gray matter density that had dropped 31%. The audience murmured. This was my brain when I was silent, Evelyn said. I was in a marriage where neither of us spoke about what mattered. I was a scientist who studied the neuroscience of silence while living it, and I was dying slowly, quietly, with no one the wiser. She clicked to the next slide. A new image, her brain 6 months ago, the anterior cingulate cortex had thickened, new connections had formed, the gray matter density was nearly back to baseline. This is my brain after 8 months of daily confrontation logs, structured communication exercises and deliberate discomfort, she said. The alarm system can be rebuilt. But here's what the data also shows, the process is painful. It requires daily commitment. And most people quit before the recovery happens, not because they are weak, but because they have been trained by silence to believe that the pain of speaking is worse than the pain of enduring. She paused. The room was completely quiet. She thought about the father in the wheelchair, the wooden house model, the final closing of the door. She thought about her mother who had never learned to speak, who had died with her hands full of unspoken words. She thought about Michael, sitting in the back of the room, his hand resting on a small crooked box he had made for her. Here is what I learned, Evelyn said. Silence is not peace. It is a slow, progressive brain injury. It destroys your ability to recognize harm, to initiate change, to protect the people you love. And the antidote is not love, it is not hope, it is not patience. The antidote is the willingness to feel the alarm, to hear that small, insistent signal that something is wrong, and to act on it before the signal stops coming. She stepped away from the podium. She walked to the edge of the stage. She looked at the 300 scientists, many of whom were now crying or holding hands or staring at their own laps, seeing their own lives reflected in her words. If you take nothing else from this talk, she said, take this. The next time you feel that flicker of wrongness in your marriage, your workplace, your family, your country, do not swallow it. Do not tell yourself it's fine. Do not wait for the perfect moment or the perfect words. Say something, even if it's awkward, even if it's ugly, even if the box is crooked and the lid doesn't close. She smiled. It was a real smile, not the frozen smile of endurance. The brain can change, she said, but only if you give it a reason. Be the reason. The applause was thunderous, but Evelyn barely heard it. She was looking at Michael, who was standing now, the crooked box in his hands, his eyes shining. She walked down the steps of the stage and across the conference room floor. People parted to let her through. She reached him and took the box. She opened it. Inside was a new piece of paper. 1 year, it read, and I still see you, I always will. Evelyn closed the box. The lid did not close all the way, it never would, and that was perfect. If this story touched you, if it made you think about your own boundaries, your own family, your own worth, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories. Subscribe to Miss Cat Story for more true life narratives that will make you feel, think, and maybe even change. And leave a comment. Have you ever had to set a hard boundary with someone you love? I read every single one. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember, you matter even when no one is watching.